Democrats were still in office at the time during and just after al-Qaeda struck the Navy vessel Cole. You will see further on in this book how the Democratic Party used their power to set in motion a series of events with the help of the terrorist regime al-Qaeda. Yes, the American government funded the attacks at the cost of American blood, but also by the American tax-paying citizens. The proof I will present to you for the repayment for all of what al-Qaeda did comes decades later, but for now I am tying these series of events together for you, so you will know my motives for writing this book are backed with logic, documented proof, and not just paranoia and conspiracy. Just follow along and the proof that ties this all together will be made crystal clear to those truth seekers with real discernment. The destruction of the Twin Towers and the attack on the Navy vessel Cole were both utilized in such a horrific way that was choreographed to make America feel unsafe and further an ever-growing agenda. The tone and the energy after Al Gore lost the election was anger, resentment, retribution, but most of all jealousy. The tone of anger became apparent in the way Clinton's administration did nothing in aiding during the transitional period between the old and the newly elected president's administration. Example being Clinton's personnel removed all the W's from the keyboard of every computer in the White House. Can you imagine clocking in for your first day of work and you try to type a memo from the White House without the W key? I know this might seem to be a prank done by one administration to another. On a more serious note, just before Clinton was supposed to step down as President Clinton's administration knew about the impending attack on the Navy vessel Cole and who was behind it, but never did anything to prevent the attack that took 12 naval officers. This important information about who choreographed the attack on the Cole and the terrorists that claimed responsibility was withheld from the newly elected president's administration. Some would say that it was withheld so President Bill Clinton could use plausible deniability if ever found out. I would venture to say that al-Qaeda was hired by the Democrats and the USS Cole was an audition and/or a rehearsal. Please keep reading. This information I am giving you will all fall into place. I am just pulling all the pieces to the center of the table for you to start putting the puzzle together. At the heart of these plans was a forced illusion shoveled down the throats of the American public by way of chaos and fear. Part of this illusion of fear was to have the world believe that the Republican Party was unable to fight a war. What people don't understand is that with the amount of devastation at the terrorists' hands in such a short amount of time became the catalyst for laws we have in place today. These are laws as a result of that time frame that we cannot take back. Present day, many believe that taking retribution for September 11th was unjustified. 1 week after September 11th, we found out who was responsible. Senate passed a vote almost unanimously to go into Afghanistan and exact America's revenge. The whole eye for an eye payback and call for retribution was not solely the newly elected president's decision. Nearly every senator representing the whole of the United States screamed from their respective podiums for retribution. The country was so devastated and up in arms, wanting their pound of flesh in return for lives lost. America already made the decision to invade Afghanistan before George Bush could make his first appearance on television following the attack. Most of the Americans alive won't admit how they felt, or they just choose not to remember, because it would mean that they wished harm and some would even refuse to admit it in fear that they would be labeled a racist. By disconnecting from admitting the days leading into the invasion of Afghanistan, it then becomes easier for the masses to blame what happened to the Bush administration. We must note that for the agenda to blossom and grow, it must be watered. In this case, the water is chaos, confusion, and fear. The world had to see as someone you must fear, and whatever decisions he makes will only bring chaos. At all costs, the newly elected president had to be seen as a power-hungry dictator who only wants the oil that the Middle East had to offer. What I am trying to present to you is a deep dive into the reality of deception and the levels of corruption. All the parties that were involved, and in some cases still all worked in silence for the purpose of robbing Americans of the truth. They denied the truth by spinning a narrative of fear, intensifying our instinct to survive. One of the tools used were decades of smoke and mirrors, dependent upon people's conditioned urge for deception and subjugation. I am going to do my due diligence and show you just how wide the scope of manipulation it took to cover up by a very dark and insidious agenda that took far too long to be addressed. I need you to now imagine countless clandestine societies that hold much of the world's power. Power that has countless and infectious tendrils that infiltrate all aspects of society, everything from world disasters, elections, and ultimately leveraging humanity's fears against themselves. You must know that atrocities like 9/11 and the attack on the Navy vessel Cole are needed catalysts like a messy ingredient in pie only made for the evil ones. These offenders have been working overtime to cover up their evil deeds, then continue as if we never cared. These evil societies know that in reality time is the catalyst for humanity to survive. These people know that for the masses people have no wants in giving up, but instead they know that in this age humans have the capacity to forget before giving up. This theory enabled the agenda to be what some call a conspiracy theory instead of the reality, and that reality is truth. These networks of societies have employed countless think tanks, the kind of think tanks that spend decades conjuring up end-time scenarios. These end-time scenarios are more like human behavior studies with the purpose of wanting to know how we will react. The reasoning behind these studies have many facets, but ultimately the powers that be can stay in power. Some of these unknown think tanks are in charge of some horrific fear-based cause and effect shadow games. When the data is mined, then they use that data to cause fear, destruction, and division. When the time is right and they need to push their narrative or unfold a new agenda, the data goes real-time. Like a magician, they will use distraction, pressure, and fear to fool the audience like a magician's sleight of hand. We will touch on this further, but I wanted to let you know that these magicians have money, connections, power, and purpose. I must set the tone of don't be fooled and follow the facts as I will present to you at the end of my book. Articles, dates, names, and quotes, but I wanted you to have your own belief system and ultimately let you choose to believe rather than run quote after quote with no room for you to read. I am sure you have read books that do just that, all in hopes you will believe. Trust me, when the story has a gray area, it will be back with common knowledge and discernment. The people within these endgame societies put into play a trigger that causes these incidents, almost like a villain in a black and white movie that has a long line of black powder leading to a wagon loaded with barrels reading TNT. All that is missing is a black cloak, top hat, and a handlebar mustache. These mere coincidental happenings would seem to be just a coincidence, but what it is truly meant to cause distress and division within society. To hidden locations or representations that cause people to become so unbalanced that the only thing they can do is think selfishly and in division, then division takes root in their lives. Much like that of September 11th, fuse was lit by the attack on the vessel Cole, coupled with the loss of the presidential election. This fuse was silent, but seen around the world and without communication between offenders. Well, besides that of communication via the news coverage, which triggered chaos and pandemonium soon followed. Kind of a cloak and dagger counter-ops communication. This was a smart move if you think in nefarious ways, insidious to tell the truth. They accomplished all this communication with no phone calls made, no emails to track, just a meeting done prior to the election with the signal being if Bush wins the election, then take to the air. Pretty ingenious planning by the Democrats. We might not have seen it then, but the devastation of 9/11 led to both sides of the aisle. Both Democratic and Republicans acquired more political power and influence. With the chaos and devastation caused by al-Qaeda enabled the political powers to streamline their agendas years ahead of time to build a narrative, to gain fear-based votes. Causalities, if you may, kind of like if you vote in Republican, we will just get more horror and destruction, but none you could tie back to the Democratic Party.